history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Monday edition of Point of View, and I hope you had a great weekend. As we get into the issues today, I do want to point out that we have a guest in studio. We have two of the young voices that we'll be talking to over the next 2 hours, as well as a member of Congress. And I might just start off by some of the bad news, because over the weekend, lots of bad news. 3 Americans were killed. 3 were wounded on Saturday by an ISIS terrorist in Syria's security forces. That was followed up by also the information we had about 2 students who were killed and 9 injured in a shooting at Brown University, where the motive is unknown, although I want to come back to that in just a minute. But the most significant one that we've been hearing about, that at least 15, I think the number's up now higher than that, were killed and 40 injured in a terrorist attack on Hanukkah in Australia. Now, my plan was to grab Dr. Barreca before he goes out of town. He's going to catch an airplane, he and his family, in just a little while, but I wanted to come in and talk about a number of issues. And you might remember, if you were with us on Tuesday, we talked about this issue of anti-Semitism and Israel and a variety of others. And of course, we also have a booklet on terrorism, which I think is exactly what's been going on here. And so I thought we might talk about this for just a few minutes. And then I did want to have him share some things about what we learned when we had our trip, our Point of View trip to Greece, but most importantly, Turkey, because we went to Ephesus, and also to Crete. And as an individual that teaches pastoral ministries and talks about the pastoral epistles, I just thought we'd grab you just before you fly out of town. So, Paul, welcome back to Point of View.
Well, thank you. Great to be here. And yes, indeed, a full weekend of really heartbreaking news, and several of the issues, just as we were talking about Christian Zionism and the rise of anti-Semitism, it seems that at least 2 of these stories, well, perhaps even more, over the weekend on smaller scale, but especially the issue in Australia, certainly tied to anti-Semitic Islamic violence, and such a terrible thing to see and witness, especially around a very important holiday, the Festival of Lights, going back to the Maccabean period and the victory over the Maccabees and God's defense of the nation of Israel at that time.
You know, when you were saying that we know at least 2 of those had to do with Jewish, there are a number of people, and I pull this from our good friend Jim Garrity, who says it may just be coincidence, but this shooting took place on the start of Hanukkah. This took place at this particular area where Rachel Friedberg was. She's a teacher of economics, but actually is the faculty associate in the program in Judaic Studies, and actually spent 4 years on the faculty at the Department of Economics at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And again, he says you don't want to jump to any conclusions. It could be all coincidental, but nevertheless, that a shooter targeted the university program on Judaic Studies. It's maybe just a coincidence. The vice president of the school's college Republicans was one of those who was killed, was a follower of Charlie Kirk. So even the one that seemed like the outlier may not be. And I think it just brings us back to one of the reasons why we did that program Tuesday, and why I encourage people to maybe find out more about what you're doing through FIM, Fellowship International Mission, because it does seem to me that at a time when people aren't sure how to think about Israel, how to think about anti-Semitism, this is where we need some really clear voices, don't you think?
Absolutely. And we can be pro-Israel and still pro-evangelism in Muslim countries. And that's kind of the interesting thing about a ministry like FIM. In fact, on Sunday, after Sunday school, someone came and questioned us about replacement theology and was very pleased to hear our position that no, God still has a plan for Israel. But that does not make you anti-Muslim. Being pro-Israel does not at all indicate that. In fact, we have missionaries with FIM that are ministering to Muslims even here in the U.S. and in Florida, in Colorado, and in other places. We keep it very low key because we don't want to interfere with their ability to minister to those folks. But you can be pro-Israel and pro-evangelism to Muslim countries. They are not mutually exclusive to one another.
I might just mention, too, one of the other articles I'll just mention, but I would certainly encourage you to read it, by Stephen Sokop, called Nihilism, Anti-Zionism, and the Church's Ongoing Failure, in which he points out that there are just a number of people that still say that supporting Israel is not something we as Christians should do. So I wanted you to see his piece, and we certainly have spent some time talking to you about that. But my original plan, and by the way, we'll come back to this whole issue of shooting in the second hour, but since I only have a short amount of time with you, one of the things I thought would be very good is to say that when we took our tour to Greece and to Turkey, first of all, one of the things that you and I got to see for the first time is Ephesus. And as an individual that teaches pastoral epistles at places like Word of Life all over the world, you actually spend a fair amount of time talking about Timothy being in Ephesus, and that's 1st and 2nd Timothy.
Exactly. Yeah, these epistles are so mind-opening when you look at where Paul is and the circumstances that take place in 1 Timothy and Titus. We sometimes refer to them as the pastoral epistles, but they're really written to Timothy ministering to the church in Ephesus. And just if we could focus on Ephesus for a minute, the most exciting part of Ephesus was being in front of the library.
Yes.
And so this is a facade. You've probably seen it in movies or sets. You can certainly look it up on the internet, look for the library in Ephesus. But what it means to me is that, and to all Bible scholars, at the time that Paul is there in Ephesus, it was a place of academic interest. It was what we would call a university town. Mm-hmm. And with that means there's the philosophy, there's the academic, kind of arrogance that's there. And Timothy was sent to Ephesus by Paul after Paul is in prison in Rome. Of course, this is after the shipwreck in Acts 27, and he's now in prison. He's under house arrest in Rome. He's got friends coming to visit him. And two of the friends that come to encourage him there are Timothy and Titus. Mm-hmm. At the end of that prison time, he's released, and he takes Timothy and Titus. He drops Titus off on this huge island in the Mediterranean, what is now in a Greek island, but then it was the island of Crete, still today called the island of Crete. And then he takes Timothy to Ephesus. And these two places have unique challenges that Paul puts his number one and his number two, and you could argue which one is one and which one is two, but he takes his two best guys, his two strongest leaders, and brings them here to these places. And in Ephesus, I think one of the things that Paul was confronting there, that Timothy was confronting there, was all of the false teaching and the problems that had come into the church. And I like to point out that when Paul tells Timothy that in Ephesus there are people teaching myths and endless genealogies, well, we're not addressing that today, but I think for all of our listeners, especially pastors, we have from Paul's letter to Timothy an encouragement to talk about contemporary issues and to really address them in a very thoughtful and insightful way, just like you do every day here on the radio, Kerby.
We're going to take a break and talk a little bit more about 1st and 2nd Timothy. You might even pull out your Bible. And then we're going to talk about Titus and Crete. And I think you're going to find out some fascinating things about both of these individuals, but we do need to take a break. And if you find yourself saying, I'd like to know a little bit more, of course, we have a link to FIM in case you'd like to correspond with Paul Barreca. Dr. Paul Barreca in studio with us today. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
President Trump announced his desire to pause migration from Afghanistan until he's satisfied that migrants from that country and other unstable countries have been thoroughly investigated. His comment came after the shooting of 2 National Guard members, but this is not just a knee-jerk reaction. there are some concerning issues. President Biden declared that American withdrawal from Afghanistan should be completed by September 11th, 2021, which would have been the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attack. One of America's worst security incidents took place days before on August 26th, when a suicide bomber killed 13 U.S. service members, wounded 18 others, killed approximately 170 Afghans with at least 200 more wounded. We were assured that migrants from Afghanistan were properly vetted by the government. Columnist Terry Jeffrey points to a recent report warning that the Department of Homeland Security encountered obstacles to screen, vet, and inspect evacuees arriving as part of Operation Allies Refuge, Operation Allies Welcome. The report concluded that DHS may have admitted or paroled individuals into the United States who pose a risk of national security and the safety of local communities. Lest you think the shooting in November was an isolated incident, Terry Jeffrey provides other stories of incidents from other Afghan nationals who were brought to this country. Cal Thomas reminds us that the November shooter shouted Allahu Akbar before opening fire, a statement often used by terrorists. We need to reevaluate the procedures that brought Afghans into this country. The safety of our country depends upon it. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view on chemical abortion, go to viewpoints.info/chemical abortion. Viewpoints.info/chemical abortion. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let me just mention we're going to be talking to a lot of different people today, and so you can just continue to stay on because pretty soon we're going to be talking with Sophia Hamilton about some of the constitutional issues, and of course she's also an expert on healthcare policy, so I might talk about that. Congressman Keith Self will be with us talking about his attempt to try to ban CBDCs, that was central bank digital currency. Agustina Cid will be with us talking about immigration the next hour, so we just have lots that we're going to be covering. But again, if you find yourself wanting to correspond with Paul Barreca, Dr. Paul Barreca, you can go to fim.org. We have that link there as well. Also have a link to his Facebook page, which is, of course, with FIM and even X. So all of it is on the website, pointofview.net. But just a minute ago, we were talking about 1st and 2nd Timothy. And the first part is, of course, dealing with false teachers. But one of the reasons you love to teach this to so many students is it really then sets forth what the church needs to look like, the qualifications for an overseer, which we see in 1 Timothy, we see it again in Titus, how a church should be conducted, and that is so essential. And then in some respects, we are benefiting from the work that Paul wrote to both Timothy and Titus about how to set up what happens in Ephesus as well as in Crete.
In fact, in 1 Timothy chapter 3, Paul writes to Timothy, and he says, "Hey, I want to come back and see you again." He doesn't seem that he ever got that opportunity. But he says this, "In case I am delayed, I am writing to you so that you will know how people are to conduct themselves in the church of God, which is the pillar and foundation of the truth." And so these letters are very, very practical. In fact, modern-day commentators such as Andreas Kostenberger and others no longer refer to them as the pastoral epistles because they don't want to give this maybe a misunderstanding that, oh, these are just for your pastor to read, and they're calling them now the letters to Timothy and Titus, which I think is a good title. But they have a lot of information, very, very practical for the church. As you mentioned, of course, the choosing of elders, the importance of prayer, and some controversial, something that some folks find controversial. I don't think they're controversial at all, but the role of women in ministry and the importance of women as the foundation of the home and the care for the home and the family and the children. And that's so important to preserve the church and to keep the church from falling into or following after false teachers.
You know, one of the things we did encourage people to do is look up what the picture might look of Ephesus, and those pictures are there. When we come to Crete, of course, we don't have as much there, but in some respects, I thought it was interesting yesterday in our Sunday school class, you mentioned that when you pull up to Crete, there's a lot of industry, a lot of shipping and everything, and that doesn't necessarily give you the image of what it was like for Titus, but in some respects, that's exactly what it was probably like.
Yeah, so after being in some beautiful beautiful places in Greece, Athens and the Parthenon, and some of these beautiful islands that are, postcard islands like Santorini and Mykonos, beautiful beaches and white roofs and all that. We get to Crete and we get to the port of Hierapolis, and there's cruise ships and there's cargo ships and there's fishing boats and there's, tractor trailers and cargo cranes and all this. And Kim, my wife, says, well, this isn't really a very beautiful place. But I was so excited because it brought into mind, this is exactly, of course, the technology being different, but this is exactly the kind of idea when Titus got there. Crete was a commercial island, a place where a lot of trade would come through, and sailors and ships and well, if you know anything about sailors and what happens in ports of call, Paul tells Titus that these Cretans, they have kind of this reputation of being evil beasts, lazy gluttons, and liars, and that's what the reputation of the island was. An island, by the way, the size of Long Island.
I did not realize that until you said that yesterday.
120 miles long, and
yes.
I lived for a couple of years on Long Island, have a lot of family there, so I know about the Long Island Expressway and, driving back and forth. Crete was a huge place.
Yes.
And Titus is sent there with the task. Here's what Paul writes in Titus chapter 1, verse 5. This is why I left you in Crete, so that you might put what remained in order and appoint elders in every town as I directed you. So a huge task for Titus. Paul's relationship with Titus goes back to the first missionary journey. He's actually known Titus longer than he has Timothy. And he has sent Titus on some of the most difficult assignments. You'd have to look back. If you just do a Google search or a word search of Titus, especially in Acts, you'll find all of the places that Paul sends Titus. He sends him to Thessalonica. He sends him to Corinth. Remember those letters to the Corinthians? That was a troubled church, a challenging church. Titus gets the hard tasks, and he handles them extremely well, and was set with this task of this island, that the gospel first came to Crete at the day of Pentecost, because in Jerusalem, during Peter's sermon, it mentions that there were that there were Jews there from Crete who heard the gospel, got saved.
Back, yeah.
Now they establish a church, and now Titus comes 30 years later and says, hey, I'm serving Paul here, and guess what, guys? We've got to change things up. How do you think those folks in the churches on Crete felt about that? Yeah, this is a really difficult task that Paul gives to Titus. And in fact, we were there, and we were at a Greek Orthodox church.
Cathedral.
Cathedral, yeah, and it's the Cathedral of Titus.
Yes,
and they claim that the skull of Titus is there. There's actually a skull encased in acrylic or something like that. I don't think it's Titus's skull, but it shows the significance of Titus to Christians on Crete over 2,000 years.
Well, the one thing I want to talk about is the reason you don't think it is that we have evidence that Titus didn't stay in Crete. We have now evidence, historical evidence, and if you will, archaeological evidence that he made his all the way to Germany. Talk about that.
So a few years ago, I'm looking for anything related to the pastoral epistles because I teach them frequently. I came across an article, a new archaeological discovery about 2-3 years ago. It was discovered several years ago, an amulet around the neck of a person who was, there was an excavation in northwestern Germany. The area is Hesse, Germany, and they know that this is a Christian burial ground from other symbols and features there. Well, around the neck of one of the Christians who were buried, there was an amulet, a silver locket, and inside the locket was a scroll. They didn't know what was on the scroll, and the archaeologists knew that if they unrolled it, it would disintegrate, and they'd never know what was written there. So they left it untouched. And along comes AI, one of the benefits of AI, and an application called video tomography. Mm-hmm. So an X-ray is taken of the amulet with the scroll still wound up, and AI takes the scroll and the image of the scroll and kind of opens it up and can recreate the writing on the scroll. And here's what it said: this burial ground dates back to 200 A.D. So within just a couple of generations of the Apostle Paul. And the amulet says this. It says, "Thanks be to God our Father." It says, "Holy, holy, holy. Thanks be to God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ, and to Titus, who brought us the gospel. Kind of paraphrasing it a little bit there, but that's the essence of that. So what that tells us, imagine this Christian takes it was a female, the most precious thing to her is contained in this amulet. If you're going to be buried with something, right, it's going to be something extremely important to you. And it was an homage and a tribute to Titus, who brings them the gospel. So think about this. Titus is last seen biblically on the island of Crete. That is 1,500 miles from this community in northern Germany. And at the time, the community in northern Germany, that was pretty much the edge of the world. Titus learned from Paul this passion to bring the gospel to those who have not heard. And he hears about these communities in northern Germany, the barbarians who have all of these pagan practices. And at risk of his own life and safety, he travels up the Aegean Sea. He probably, there were Roman roads. There's one Roman road that goes from the Aegean Sea up to the Danube River, all the way up into northern Germany. A Roman road that Titus probably walked to bring the gospel to these folks.
As I've said before, if he had to go 1,500 miles to share the gospel, what's keeping you from sharing the gospel to your neighbors across the street? But just great insights that come from Dr. Paul Barreca. Might just mention we're going to have Dr. Paul Weaver here, and you know him very well, and we'll be talking about his archaeology, and he may even bring us back to some of those as well. But do know you need to join your family and catch a plane, but it has been great to have you in here one more time, and maybe next time we'll just get you by phone. But if you would like to know more, Dr. Paul Barreca, FIM, or again, Fellowship International Ministries. And if you just hit the button that says scroll down to see more, you will see his picture. We'll take you to FIM.org and all the material. We also have a link to Facebook as well as X. And it's just been great to have you here over the weekend.
Thank you so much, Kerby. And just appreciate the ministry of Prestonwood Church. I know you're a member there, and we took in the gift of Christmas yesterday and was just so blessed by that performance and your great hospitality as well.
We're going to take a break. We have a lot more to cover, as you might imagine. All that coming up right after this.
God is moving in this nation, and how we meet this moment will influence the future that our children and grandchildren inherit. Let me explain. Bible reading among self-identified Christians is higher than it's been in a decade, and it's millennials and Gen Z leading this Bible reading surge. But even though Bible reading is at a high, trust in the accuracy of the Bible is at a low. And that's why we must meet this moment to help the young adults who are seeking truth to become anchored to it. You can meet the moment by partnering with Point of View. Your partnership helps equip Americans with the biblical perspectives our nation so desperately needs. Give today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. And when you give by December 31st, your gift is doubled. That's pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Lots of topics today, lots of guests today, and I hope you'll stay with us for the entire 2 hours. Already, of course, talked about the Day of Terror during the weekend and spent a fair amount of time talking about what happened in Australia and the issue of anti-Semitism. We're going to get into now with a guest on Is America Crossing a Constitutional Red Line, but also want to get into a couple of other topics because we bring back to the microphone Sophia Hamilton. As a matter of fact, we have a link to Sounding Off with Sophia. She's a healthcare policy analyst at Americans for Prosperity, also a harm reduction fellow with the Young Voices, one of two young voices that we'll be talking to today. And certainly, Sophia, welcome back to Point of View.
Thank you so much for having me back on, Kerby.
I wanted to talk about healthcare for just a minute, since that's your expertise. We have been having quite a discussion this week and even on Friday with Dr. Merrill Matthews and others about the attempt to try to have enhanced kinds of subsidies into Affordable Care Act or Obamacare. And it does seem to me that since you're a healthcare expert, I suspect you're going to be probably writing and speaking on that issue. Is that true?
It's something that I will be following, but my expertise is really on the state level. So I'll be following it at the federal level because it'll affect everything going on in the healthcare sphere, but definitely won't be my main focus day to day, which I'm a little grateful for there.
Well, I'd love to hear what you have to say when you do have a chance to address that, so that is the case. Well, the topic we have here is America crossing a constitutional red line. I have some articles, but I'd like to just have you start out with some of your concerns and talk about where we start drawing those lines appropriately.
Yeah, so I'll give a little bit of background to the conversation. Several weeks ago, 6 federal lawmakers who all had military or intelligence backgrounds posted a video online where they were jointly calling for military members to not follow illegal orders. And that statement in it of itself is correct. Military members are not required and they should not follow illegal orders. But the video lacked a lot of context and nuance and details because that process is very complicated to defining what is an illegal order. And President Trump took great offense to this video, and he called this video and these federal lawmakers, seditious. He called it seditious behavior because he felt that it was going against him and his administration. And I think that is a huge constitutional issue because realistically, they are using their freedom of speech, our First Amendment right. And we've seen this right just being pulled back over the years and especially recently from both sides of the aisle. And so I think this being at the federal level with federal lawmakers against President Trump, it's a really high-profile, scary attack on the First Amendment.
And again, I think you're right because he was making the case simply, I think it was in Truth Social of all things, but if you think that's sedition, we also always have and have mentioned over the years how sedition has been used going all the way back, if you will, to the second president of the United States and all the way through. So there is a couple of things I'd like to kind of sort out. First of all, these are 6 lawmakers. We might as well give the names. Again, Elisa Slotkin, again, is an individual from Michigan. And then from Arizona, you have Mark Kelly. Then you have Representatives Jason Crow, Chris DeLuzzo, Maggie Goodlander, and Chrissy Houlihan, who, again, are individuals, some of whom have actually served in the military. And so you do have your right of free speech to address those issues. But the question that was being raised is, are we planting, if you will, seeds of doubt in the minds of the military who are then wondering, if I follow some order right now, which I think is legal and constitutional, will the next administration or even the next Congress bring me up on charges? So there is a way in which we could obviously reject the way in which the president handled it, but also there was that other issue about how responsible you as a person in the military should be with following certain orders. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, so it is the responsibility of the military members to follow legal orders and to also refuse to follow illegal orders. But that process is so complicated. They first have to go to their JAG officer, so the lawyer that works with their troops, and bring up the concern, and then they'll go from there. So it's not just they can decide, oh, I don't think this is lawful, I'm not going to follow it. It's a whole process. And if that order is actually lawful and they chose to not follow that process and to not follow that order, then that could get them in a lot of trouble. In that context and that nuance, was not given in the video. And so I would hope that military members are aware of the process. But as you're saying, yes, that video could have put seeds of doubt in their minds, but it's still ultimately their personal responsibility, these military members' personal responsibility to follow the legal processes to ensure that they are acting on legal orders, and if not, they are rightfully refusing to follow illegal orders in the correct way.
By the way, if you'd like to join the conversation, we know this is something that maybe some of you that have served in the military would like to join the conversation. That number, 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. Let's give some specificity to it and then see what we can do with that, because the Uniform Code of Military Justice can and will punish troops for failing to follow an order that should turn out to be lawful. But at the same time, on the other, troops can be criminally charged with what is called Article 9 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice by willfully disobeying a superior commissioned officer, and Article 92, failure to obey an order. And in some respects, I'll hold up this booklet. I did this a while back, a little booklet on a biblical point of view on civil disobedience, because some of our listeners are going to say, well, I'm not in the military, never served in the military, but this whole idea of, are you ever commanded to do something from a Christian point of view that would violate the Bible? No, you're not allowed to do that. And we have examples in the Old and New Testament of that, whether it's the Hebrew midwives or Daniel and the lion's den, or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or Acts 5:29, we obey God rather than men. So there are some really important broad issues about civil disobedience, but there's also this issue of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So, and we can reject what the president has said, but there is a bigger issue. That is, okay, how, if I'm in the military, am I to sort out what is legal and illegal, since we've had some pretty sorry examples of individuals that have followed your orders, and I think of Vietnam comes to mind right off the bat, of individuals that were actually violating orders for which they were held criminally responsible. So that is an important issue as well, isn't it, Sophia?
It is. It is. And I think what's really at the crux of this is Congress has given up so much of their power to the executive branch. They no longer are declaring war. We're just seeing us go into these different these different battles, whatever you want to call it. It's never war, but deploying the military. And so the reason why this video was posted, though they didn't say it in the video, it's likely because of everything going on in South America around Venezuela. And so the lawmakers were trying to tell the military members to not follow illegal orders, which, again, fair point, lacking the nuance, though. But what they're failing to see is that they have given up the power to the executive branch. They've willingly done that, and Congress really does need to come back and take over their constitutional duties to have less of these points of confusion where you don't know what is legal, what is war, and what's going on. And I think that would really help this situation instead of these vague videos where they're not giving all of the context, and they're not even making claims that there are illegal orders.
Right.
Senator Slotkin even came out and said that she wasn't aware of any illegal orders that have been made by the administration.
Right.
So I think they do just need to, we all need to focus on the Constitution and, one, uphold the First Amendment first and foremost, but then also uphold the roles of government and of the different branches.
Right. Step back, take a deep breath, and begin to think through some of this. And your point's well taken, because as we have talked about last week and probably will again this week, what is going on in the Caribbean and Venezuela is a very important issue. We're coming to a break, and I think we had a comment or two of some people that wanted to weigh in with this, and it's certainly one topic that we've put on for you to discuss. We've given you some articles to think about. And, of course, next hour we have Congressman Keith Self. He is a graduate of West Point. He might even have a comment or two. Let's take a break. We'll get to your calls right after this.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Sophia Hamilton is America Crossing a Constitutional Red Line. And I thought for just a minute, again, Sophia, you're one of the young voices. And I might just say for some of our young listeners, there's a phrase that was attributed to a Republican senator about the idea that partisanship stops at the water's edge. And not always was that true, but often it was. And in this highly politicized environment where the feeling that you have to produce a video, then the reaction from the president, then the back and forth. There was a time when it wasn't quite as contentious as we see right now. And as I said, maybe backing up a little bit, maybe also having Congress redefine its roles would be significant. But let me take a phone call from North Carolina. Richard, I believe you have served in the military. Maybe you can provide some perspective here.
Oh, yes, sir, Kerby. 22 years from Vietnam, retired in 1988, served on patrol boats and submarines and a destroyer when I was in Vietnam.
Wow.
And I can tell you, my career, I wouldn't trade for the world, but it was like a Duncan yo-yo. I essentially have experience with the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And in some cases, I had to go to the mat and fight over not this kind of petty-ante stuff, but really legal things. Now, let me explain something about what is defined as a legal order or a just order. You have standard operating procedures you go by, and those you don't violate, such as red tagging out a piece of equipment. You don't take the tag off of a valve and open it up because somebody might die from it, or you might wind up causing a fire or something like that. That is a permanent statement. That is a legal document.
Makes sense.
And if you were told to tag out that system, that's what you do. Now, in the case of a situation where a lieutenant or a commander is in authority, and he tells you that he wants you to do something, and you are the subject matter expert, he's not, and you know it's a violation of safety standards and protocols, you can bring it to his attention ethically and show him why. And if he still wants to proceed with that, then it kind of gets a little bit tacky. And I've been in that position. And I refused to accept his authority to lay a full nitrogen bottle down in shore power cables, which was electrical hazard potential.
Well, let me just for a minute come back to you, Sophia, because I think what we've got from Richard is it's a little more complex than some people would be led to believe. And, of course, when you're talking about using lethal force, which I think is really what was kind of on the minds of some of the individuals that produced that video, it's even more dangerous than even how you handle some of the equipment that you might be using. So that's kind of the point you're making. We are having a video showing up in the midst of all sorts of tension and polarization. And I think your suggestion is maybe it's time for Congress to step in. And, of course, next hour we'll be talking to a member of Congress, so maybe I'll suggest that to him. But what are your thoughts?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as Richard was pointing out, it's so much more complex than people realize, and as the video was stating, because you have to go through the whole legal process, and there are different ranks, and it's a really sticky situation to get yourself in. And then if you don't go through that process and you disobey an order and it is legal, you could get in trouble. Or if you do follow an order and it ends up being illegal, you could also get in trouble. So I think these military members are in a really tough space, and just putting out this honestly performative video that gives no context or nuance because they feel like they have to say something is not helpful. What would be helpful is Congress going back to their constitutional duties and taking back the power that they have just willingly ceded over decades to the executive branch. So we actually know when we're in war and we're having those declarations I think would bring so much more clarity to this situation for all of the military members that have been put in this tough spot.
And again, the point you made earlier is, when's the last time we declared war? Now, to be fair, we did have the authorization for use of military force, and that was a joint resolution. And so whether you had George Herbert Walker Bush or George W. Bush, you had some authorization for the use of military force. And, of course, you have the War Powers Act and a few other things. But it does seem to me that if we are concerned about, and let's take some easy ones, should we put National Guard troops in the U.S. cities? Well, that one, I think, becomes a Supreme Court decision. Do we have the authorization of use of force in the Caribbean? Well, Congress hasn't done anything, so it does seem to me that in the vague ambiguity of the world that we find ourselves right now, we're maybe asking too much of our uniformed commanders and our individuals that have enlisted to serve this nation, and it's not fair to them.
Mm-hmm. No, I 100% agree, because they are not themselves legal experts, but they have so much pressure being put on them where they could very easily get in trouble if they are not doing the correct thing when they are being given orders. And I just don't think we're putting them in a fair position. And it really just goes back to the federal government needing to go back to their constitutional roles and answering a lot of constitutional questions from the Supreme Court side.
Well, I appreciate you raising the issue. It's the kind of conversation we like to have here, and maybe I'll get some other feedback as well. But let me, before we run out of time, mention that if people would like to follow you, they can click on your picture, and you can go to the Substack place where it is Sounding Off with Sophia, and that way you can see some of the various resources and articles that you have. That's a way in which they could maybe interact with you if they would like to do so. And if you come up with any great wisdom terms the issue of health care, since you're kind of working in that area, we would certainly value that as well, because that's the ongoing debate that we'll be having, along with this one about whether or not the military can disobey orders and when they can disobey. So again, I appreciate you being with us today here on Point of View.
Thank you. No, thank you so much for having me.
And again, I'll get back to some of the other phone calls a little bit later if we have some time. I just wanted you to know that we did put that particular issue on the website at the top of the hour. It is just one of those things where we have scheduled a member of Congress, Keith Self. Now, he's a graduate of West Point. He's an individual that served 25 years in the military and Army, as you might imagine. He was deployed to Grenada, Bosnia, Afghanistan, Iraq. I mean, he really just has an incredible resume in that regard, represents the 3rd Congressional District. But he came to my attention the other day when he wanted to actually have Congress to formally ban CBDCs. What are those? Central bank digital currency. This is something that there was an executive order by President Trump, but that could be reversed next time. And it's a very important vote that he wanted to have attached to the Defense Authorization Act, and so we're going to talk to him about that. I suspect he's probably have a few other comments about whether you obey or disobey orders and when, but we'll talk with him, and we'll get back into the issue of immigration, because we are going to be looking at a very good piece by Agustina Cid, and she has written a piece about immigration and Trump's gold card, which we've never really talked about. So lots of issues to cover today, and if you find yourself appreciating what we cover, I hope that you'll take the time to visit our website. Maybe click on that button that says Give Now. We have $155,000 matching challenge. So your gift is doubled, and we'd love to hear from you. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
It was not that long ago that censorship appeared to be almost inevitable. Free speech was being attacked and strangled in many places. And some of us wondered if this was the end. But now, many feel a new sense of hope, a chance for a fresh dawn. Let me caution you, now is not the time to relax. It's a time to press forward, to use this fresh opportunity to proclaim and learn how to apply truth to current issues. By the fact you're here, listening right now, that tells me that you recognize the vital role Point of View plays as a voice of truth. For more than 50 years, we've informed and equipped people who have made a real difference. And when you give to Point of View today, you breathe life into what can be a new golden era for the truth. Please, take a moment right now and invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net or give it 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net. Click in now or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, we're going to talk about central bank digital currency, CBDCs. You've probably heard us talk about that before, and you might say, well, okay, but what's the issue? And we have posted a very good post by Representative Keith Self, because I heard the other day about his concern about the fact that there had been a promise to actually have language banning a central bank digital currency in what is called the Must-Pass Defense Authorization Act, and that did not happen. You might say, well, what's the big deal? After all, President Trump actually signed an executive order actually banning CBDCs. Well, let me remind you that the previous president, President Biden, signed an executive order encouraging the Federal Reserve to study the feasibility of digital CBDCs, and that's why we thought this was an important issue to actually be in the law. And so I wanted to see if we could get Representative Keith Self on, and since last hour we were talking about this idea of disobeying legal or illegal orders, maybe I'll ask him about that in just a few minutes, but as I mentioned just as we were going to the break last hour, an individual, Keith Self, has graduated from West Point, spent 25 years in the U.S. Army as a lieutenant colonel in Special Forces and Rangers, and is a representative of the 3rd Congressional District. So, Keith Self, welcome back to Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby. Great to be here with you.
Well, I've always appreciated you and your stand on so many issues. And when I found out that you were fighting to ban CBDCs, putting on a bill that is, of course, must carry, must pass, you were, I think, promised, were you not, that this would be the language that would be put in the Defense Authorization Bill? Tell us more, if you might.
Absolutely, Kerby. The exact language authored by the whip, Tom Emmer. We were promised in an office with the speaker, the whip, the leader, that it would be in the bill. And it didn't happen. And the Senate is the one that negotiated it out. But yes, this is vitally important. This is, in my mind, the last leg of the surveillance state. It's basically transparency of your financials to the federal government.
And I might just mention that I do have a booklet on privacy and surveillance. We're going to update it in 2026 because of so many other things that have happened. But let's explain that for just a minute, because first of all, with a CBDC, and again, a central bank digital currency, every transaction could be tracked by the government. And what we have posted here is an interview you did on Fox Business, reminding us that if you want to get a preview of what this would look like, go to China. Is that right?
Absolutely. China uses this exact tool, a central bank digital currency, to give their citizens what they call a social credit score. And a social credit score tells you how obedient you are to the government. So they tell you what you can and cannot purchase. They tell you how much you can spend. So China is the example today of just how dangerous this is. When the government has total transparency of your financials and your transactions and how you spend your money, it's dangerous. It is absolutely dangerous.
Let's mention another aspect of that. You can see I've studied this before. CBDCs could make it easy for the government to freeze financial resources or limit your purchases. In other words, okay, Keith Self, you've eaten too much meat. You're a good Texan, but sorry, you can't spend your money, your digital money, on meat. Or you've been driving around too much, meeting all your donors and all your supporters, so you can't get gas. These kinds of things, which seem hypothetical, all we have to do is see how they're already being implemented in other countries.
How about Canada? You may remember several years ago when the truckers had a protest against the COVID vaccine, and they actually froze the bank accounts of truckers that were involved. Canada, our northern neighbor, supposedly a democracy, not like China, supposedly a democracy, froze funding for the truckers that were involved. Again, a great example of just how dangerous government control of your money is.
And again, since you mentioned Canada, that's, again, some people might say, well, we're not China. We're a lot like Canada. How about Europe? Right now, there seems to be a lot of interest in Europe as well to having something that looks very much like a digital euro or something like that. And as far as I can tell, that's sort of a central bank digital currency, isn't it?
Well, it is, and frankly, I will tell you, the Bank for International Settlements, which is the bank for the central banks.
Yeah, BIS.
It's in Switzerland, BIS, that's right. Their 2021 study moved Europe toward that. In fact, it moved the world toward it. And now let's get to the United States itself, Kerby. The Boston Fed, in conjunction with MIT, did a study on CBDCs. Under the Biden administration. And they say we've got everything in place now, the cryptology, the everything that we need. The internet can support this. Atlanta has joined in. Cleveland has joined in. Atlanta Fed, Cleveland Fed. So there are already efforts. We already have the structure in place to do this, which is why it's so vital that we actually pass it into law. As you said before, the next president can simply undo this, the Trump ban.
I was just going to say, what can we do right now? Because I know I'll only get you on for another couple minutes, and it does seem to me that you know as well as I that we oftentimes have an action item. And is it too late for this, or is there some place maybe we can begin to generate some support on your behalf and on behalf of other people like Representative Emmert and, of course, Keith Self and others to actually get this passed, if not now, sometime in the near future?
Well, the promise was that if it didn't pass in this bill, it would be put on the next bill. So we need to keep it moving to the next must-pass bill. And frankly, if we do a reconciliation 2, we're going to find a way to put CBDCs on the next reconciliation bill. So we're already planning what the steps ahead are. So what I ask your audience to do is to start contacting your senators, your congressmen, congresswomen, to start encouraging them to support this, because this is, again, dangerous. You know, we deal with issues all the time that we think are important. This is actually dangerous to our citizens.
Well, again, we have a take action item. Right now we have one about government shutdowns, but I think we probably will do one on CBDCs. And so I know I only had a few minutes with you, but I wanted, first of all, for people to learn about this. Second of all, they can click on your picture there, and that will take them, of course, to keithself.house.gov. And then if they go behind a little further down, they can see the interview you did on Fox Business about this. And so you can get some of the information, but we'll try to pull some of that together and see if we can get behind your effort and the effort of a few other members of Congress to make that part of the legislation. Because, as you said, it's nice to have an executive order. It'd be a lot better to have a bill that goes through Congress. So, Representative Keith Self, it is always great to talk to you, and I look forward to the next opportunity.
Thank you so much, Kerby. Look forward to it.
Going to take a break, and when we come back, a short break before we get into the issue of immigration. If this is coming fast and furious, matter of fact, during the break, at one point, Paul Barreca said, "You don't lack for things to talk about." No, we really don't. There are just a lot of issues that we wanted to try to hit. It will calm down a little bit as the week goes on, and maybe next week during Christmas week, maybe even slower. But gone are the days where we said, maybe sometimes there's so little to talk about, we should do the Point of View Home and Garden Show. This isn't one of those, so we got some other issues to talk about, which we'll do right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
President Trump announced his desire to pause migration from Afghanistan until he's satisfied that migrants from that country and other unstable countries have been thoroughly investigated. His comment came after the shooting of 2 National Guard members, but this is not just a knee-jerk reaction. There are some concerning issues. President Biden declared that American withdrawal from Afghanistan should be completed by September 11, 2021, which would have been the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attack. One of America's worst security incidents took place days before on August 26, when a suicide bomber killed 13 U.S. service members, wounded 18 others, killed approximately 170 Afghans with at least 200 more wounded. We were assured that migrants from Afghanistan were properly vetted by the government. Columnist Terry Jeffrey points to a recent report warning that the Department of Homeland Security encountered obstacles to screen, vet, and inspect evacuees arriving as part of Operation Allies Refuge, Operation Allies Welcome. The report concluded that DHS may have admitted or paroled individuals into the United States who pose a risk of national security and the safety of local communities. Lest you think the shooting in November was an isolated incident, Terry Jeffrey provides other stories of incidents from other Afghan nationals who were brought to this country. Cal Thomas reminds us that the November shooter shouted Allahu Akbar before opening fire, a statement often used by terrorists. We need to reevaluate the procedures that brought Afghans into this country. The safety of our country depends upon it. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view on chemical abortion, go to viewpoints.info/chemical abortion. Viewpoints.info/chemical abortion. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, as we mentioned, going to maybe give you some information about CBDCs, and if there's an action item and we are alerted by members of Congress, we will certainly rally the troops, and that is the case. We started off by talking about such an incredible loss of life. Of course, soldiers killed in Syria, students killed at Brown University, and of course, so many Jewish people killed or wounded there in Australia. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't also mention the death of Rob Reiner and his wife. So interesting. When the stories first came out about this, they said unknown assailant. When they actually did know, was his son Nick, who stabbed them to death. And so I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot about that. And I think justifiably so, but it will probably push off of the front pages some of these other stories that we've talked about. This very significant, what some people are calling a Hanukkah massacre in Australia. And what has happened there is, I think, of great concern. So we certainly have addressed that. So I just thought I would mention that is another one of those issues we've been talking about. And I'm not sure. We'll find out more about what has happened there at Brown University. But at least one individual's pointed out that even the shooting individuals somehow associated with the program on Judaic studies at Brown. Of course, it's an economics department, so we'll just see. And it could be something related to that or completely just a coincidence, but just illustrates again, we have been concerned about this issue of anti-Semitism for some time, so I just thought I would mention that again in this second hour, in case you didn't have a chance to hear the first hour interview we did with Paul Barreca and Sophia Hamilton. Let me, as a program note, mention that tomorrow, the theme has sort of just developed into suffering and Christian living, because we have a piece by Craig Keener, who's been on the program with before, a very good article that we'll talk about with him. And then in the second hour, we'll be talking with Bev DeSalvo about her book, Return to Joy. And so for many during the Christmas season and the holiday season, it's a time where there isn't a great deal of joy and suffering and pain and grief and all that. So we will be doing some of that tomorrow, but we'll also get into some of the issues in the news. But let me real quickly mention that also there is a piece that I've posted, which I found kind of intriguing, because if you've been following along with us, one of the concerns that we've had is about artificial intelligence. And when we talk about how that could affect jobs, that's of concern. We talk about how it's affecting education. That's also a concern, because the joke around some of these campuses these days is the students are writing papers using AI and the professors are using AI to grade them. And it's like, okay, this is not the kind of education we anticipated. But there's also an issue that I thought I would raise, and that is AI inside the church. Now, we're not talking about using that to take attendance or anything. This particular article, which I've posted by Joshua Arnold, says, "Are American churches becoming pastored by AI?" Now, some of this comes from a survey, and he is very clear to point out that the survey may have its flaws, but nevertheless, he says American pastors are becoming increasingly comfortable using artificial intelligence in ministry. And this comes from a survey that was done this year by an AI company. It's called AI Company Exponential, and it's the 2020 State of AI in the Church. And it found that 91% of ministry leaders surveyed declared that they are for the use of AI in ministry. Now, again, did they see this in a positive or negative? Well, obviously, most of them probably saw it as a positive. 30% said it was positive, 5% called it inherently dangerous, and 65% said it's neutral, whose impact depends entirely on how it's used. Okay. What are the limitations? Well, again, the survey was produced, first of all, by an AI company. Just because you see a survey, sometimes you have to ask who did the survey, and they could certainly have had some clear profit motive to expand the use of AI among church leaders. So, is this a survey just to assess where people are, or is this a survey to change attitudes? And we've seen both. Second, the survey's selection was unclear. They said that they collected from a total of 594 pastors and church staff, various denomination, church sizes, and things like that. So not bad, but usually surveys that have surveys of 1,000 or more, and I know this from having done some of these ourselves, that gives you a much smaller margin of error. So you got to take that into account. But the biggest issue, and Joshua Arnold, thank you for bringing this out, unclear whether the survey participants were random or voluntary. If indeed you ask people to volunteer to give their answers, well, you're going to get an obvious bias. It's called selection bias. If those are random, maybe a little better. So take it for what it's worth, but I think it illustrates what I think we already know anecdotally, and now I think we can validate probably statistically, is that surveys like that illustrate that AI is being used with some regularity. So then they ask some obvious questions. What is the primary way you use AI tools in ministry? 36% chose content creation. So that means your pastor may be using AI to come up with content on that survey. How much, is the entire content written by AI? Is just a portion of it is? Were you maybe stuck on wanting to know a little bit more about that particular Greek word or that particular geographical location? Or were you wondering if there were other verses that are relevant to this, or whether theologians have addressed that issue? Again, how you use it is very significant. This was then followed by research, administrative work, or image or graphics generation. And I know a lot of individuals now are saying, well, let's use this to create some interesting graphics. And so that is the case. So then to the question, which AI tools were used in the last 6 months? The first was ChatGPT. Believe me, I've even had my own pastor say, yeah, I've looked this up on ChatGPT. They use that almost like a Google search. And by the way, if you ask me, I stay away from some of that because I'm afraid it might be something that would be too easy to do. I would rather write it, but from time to time, since I do have Microsoft, Copilot will show up, and I will just try to ignore it, try to even get it to stop bothering me. But one of the others was Grammarly. Now, again, that one doesn't really raise any questions. If you want to use good grammar and you don't know good grammar, having Grammarly check your grammar makes sense. Gemini, my guest today and last Tuesday used Gemini to generate some graphics and things like that. And Canva Magic Studio is another. So they're just some of the people that are in ministry using these graphics, and recognize again that although they were not only interviewing pastors, they were also interviewing other church leaders. And so if you're a worship leader and you want a nice graphic up, or you're maybe a person in a larger church that does graphics for your pastor, I can see why you would use some of these as well. But the question that I think is being asked, and it's the question you need to be asking in your own church, is, are we outsourcing ministry? This is the issue which is truly at stake, he says. Are pastors outsourcing their essential duties to a computer program? Nothing theological is at stake when an office assistant uses Grammarly to compose emails, or when a volunteer pulls icebreaker questions for youth right from ChatGPT. But when AI is shepherding the flock, then that is a real problem. And so the point he's making is one that I've seen some other church leaders making. I saw one church leader the other day that actually had, was it ChatGPT or Gemini, one of those, generate a prayer. And then he read the prayer and then asked the congregation, is that a heartfelt prayer? And everybody was, why are you asking? Because I didn't write the prayer. The AI wrote the prayer. And you begin to think through some of those issues. And so I want you to know that we will continue doing programs and even have an upcoming AI on this issue. Good opportunity for me to hold up our January issue. You will be receiving it soon, and it's Generation AI. And so again, if you are learning and wanting to know more about this, let me encourage you to do what you can to support this ministry. And we do have a banner there that says Give Now, Restoring America's Godly Heritage, a matching challenge now. It's up to $155,000, which means no matter what your gift is right now, it will be doubled. So if you can send in $100, it becomes $200. If you decide to join us at Truth Team, $1 a day, $30 a month, $360 a year, that's doubled as well. So join with us at pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
Have you ever met a child you knew would do great things? They displayed remarkable imagination, understanding, and a zest for learning. Now imagine someone takes that child and instead of fostering their potential with a real education, they feed them nothing but lies. You know, that scenario isn't so far from reality. From a young age, Americans are fed a consistent stream of distorted facts, from the secular indoctrination they receive in many public schools, to the biases presented as fact in many colleges and universities, to the barrage of misinformation from the mainstream media and the lack of moral grounding in our society. It's not that Americans aren't capable of understanding the truth, it's that they aren't exposed to it enough. You can expose more Americans to the truth when you give to Point of View, where listeners receive facts, perspective, and biblical truth they don't get from society. As long as we have truth, we have hope. Give today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Back for a final half hour, and we're going to spend some time now talking about immigration. Let me hold up our booklet on immigration, which I looked at it, and we have written that 7 years ago, so it is time for an update, and we will do that in 2026 and get into some other issues like border protection and deportation, a variety of others, but that is still one of the booklets that we have that gives you kind of a biblical view on some of the issues of immigration. But there's some other policies that have been implemented under the Trump administration that we wanted to talk about. And so to really get into this in some detail, we thought that we would take a little bit of time to work through an article that Agustina Vergara Cid has written in The Hill. First of all, we have a link to her link as well for Young Voices. She's writing on a variety of different issues, an associate fellow with the Ayn Rand Institute, a writer, speaker focusing on immigration, international issues, and much more. So we have her picture and her articles that you can find on the website as an addition to this one dealing with the immigration gold card. So, Agustina, welcome back to Point of View.
Thank you so much for having me, Kerby.
Let's, if we can, first of all, try to explain this. I know the first time I heard the president talk about the gold card, I go, what in the world are we talking about? And I suspect some of our listeners are going, I didn't even know we had a program like this. And of course, he's modified dramatically. And you believe that this could be a winner, but it needs to have some changes. But tell us what the president has proposed, first of all, if you could.
Yes, of course. So just one clarification. I wrote that article a few months ago before all the details of the gold card emerged, because I do think that a program along the lines, like broadly speaking, the concept of the gold card could potentially be a good program. I don't think it's the case with the program as it is conceived right now, and especially after having seen a little bit more of the details of the program. So essentially, under this new framework of President Trump's gold card, individuals may obtain permanent residency to the United States, not citizenship, but permanent residency. So this would happen by these individuals making a $1 million gift, as the website calls it, to the U.S. Treasury. And on the other hand, corporations can sponsor foreign workers through a $2 million contribution. So the way that this administration has framed the program is that they want to attract capital and simplify immigration for high net worth applicants. And they want to reduce the reliance on the traditional system of labor certification and other issues that are involved with other type of immigration programs that are currently in place. So this is an executive, it's comfortably executive. It was done by proclamation. So there are many concerns there about what this means, because people who apply for this gold card would not have the statutory protections that people who follow
programs that were passed by Congress do. So there's like a whole problem there as well in terms of what Congress has authorized and what it hasn't authorized. I think the administration should work with Congress to make these programs. But that's essentially what the gold card is. Essentially, you pay a lot of money, $1 million or $2 million if you're an employer, to be able to come to America.
Again, and of course, the original article I'll just mention when people read it, because it's from months ago, talked about 5 million. But whether it's a million or 2 million, whatever, the point is, it is for high net worth individuals. Now, that raises a couple of questions. The obvious one that I think you alluded to is this is not something that Donald Trump can do by executive edict, although he's been doing some of those. It does seem to me that if you're really going to have a gold card program, that's something that Congress needs to enact, don't you think?
Yes, I think so. So under the U.S. Constitution, Congress controls immigration and naturalization law, right? And yes, there has been some programs under many administrations that have been done through an executive order or by initiative of the executive. But part of the problem is what if I were to, talk to someone who's thinking about this program is, look, what the executive gives you, it can take away because you don't have the protections of an actual law passed by Congress.
Right.
So, for instance, we have seen recently the Trump administration ending temporary protected status for many nationalities. And now those people are probably, and have many of them become deportable. And this was a program, I mean, it has a foundation in congressional law, but essentially this was an executive initiative from, in part, by the Biden administration. So now this is being taken away. The same with the humanitarian sponsorship program that the Biden administration pushed forward. The Trump administration has now ended it. So the same thing could happen in the future. Say, the next president is a Democrat and decides to end this program, then those people that paid $1 million or more to come here to America, they would probably be left in limbo. So it's a very precarious legal position to be in.
Let's see if we can maybe just use your own experience, because you were born in Argentina and you're a naturalized citizen. And let's say that people are just looking at Argentina and saying, you think the devaluation of the dollar is bad. Just imagine what we're going through. And if somebody says, well, I would love to escape Argentina, come to the United States, and I pay $2 million, or I find an employer that wants to pay $1 million or something like that, that would provide opportunity for an individual. But like you said, you don't have the kind of protection you'd have if Congress were to pass a piece of legislation, right?
That's correct. And that's not even, considering the fact that, $1 million per employee, it's a lot of money to pay. And of course, so there's two ways to do this, apparently, details are not super clear, by the way. That's why I'm saying things a little bit tentatively here. But apparently employees can sponsor, employers can sponsor employees by paying $1 or $2 million, but an individual can pay themselves $1 million to come, right? So it is I would love to see if there are any employers that can spend $1 million+ on each employee.
Yes.
That would have to be such an incredibly productive employee that can offset that cost and make that investment worth it. I think even you can have geniuses that really cannot produce, that cannot produce that amount, that cannot make it worth it, financially. And then it's also for the individuals. Well, if an individual has $1 million to spare to come to America, which, look, I am a naturalized citizen and I love this country, and I jumped through, hoops of fire to be able to be here and become a citizen. And America is worth it, but not everybody that deserves to be here can afford $1 million expenditure.
That's right.
And it's $1 million just for you. So if you want to bring your spouse, your children, you have to pay $1 million for each of them as well, which has never been the case in any similar visa in the past.
Yep.
So it is basically impossible.
I think so. Yeah, but again, if you knew that there was an Elon Musk type of individual that had developed something in another country, that's a fast track, which is one of the things I wanted to open up for maybe some of the phones to get your thoughts, 1-800-351-1212, because the reaction to some of this has been, well, are we just saying we want rich people to come to this country? Or are we just saying that, if you have been very successful in high tech, or if you're a doctor or a lawyer, or whether you're maybe a biotech engineer of some sort and could bring something that we as a country could patent, that we then give a preferred status to that? I'd love to get some comments about that, but I'd love to hear yours as well just before we go to a break.
Yeah, so essentially, you would have to be an incredibly productive individual that has already seen some success, like an Elon Musk, right? Or you don't have to be the richest man on earth, but someone who has already seen a lot of success to be able to even afford this. And I am not against people, really successful and rich people coming here. I think if they choose to do so, and there's an American also willing to hire them, that's incredible. But there's also a lot of other, like Elon Musk, when he came here, for instance, he was a student. He came on a student visa here. And we didn't know, nobody knew that he was going to be Elon Musk, right? That he was going to create so much value and, fund all these incredible companies that he has been able to create. So it's really, you don't know who is going to be the next Elon Musk, right? So by having this such a high price tag to be able to come here to America and invest and create, then it's really leaving a lot of people out of the picture potentially that could become or that want to invest in America but don't have as much money.
Yes. Well, let's take a break. We'll come back and get into a couple of other issues as well, because she's been writing about a lot of issues on immigration. But if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes as we talk about this idea of a gold card. And it's a program, I'm not sure where it's going to go, but nevertheless, as she points out, the gold card program does not really address border security, but it could, because you say if the cost of the visa is adjusted, many of the people who cross the border illegally would stop doing so in favor of purchasing a legal way into the country. They spend sometimes a fair amount of money to get here, and that has to be going through the cartel and black market forces, sometimes smugglers and all the rest. These individuals instead could use money to pay the U.S. government instead, come here legally, would be thoroughly vetted just like other legal immigrants. And so that would be one benefit of this program if adjusted. So that's, I think, one benefit of it, not the least of which is, of course, President Trump's always looking for revenue sources. We've already talked about tariffs. This could be a source of income, but right now the cost is too high, I think, for it to be even an effective way for individuals to come into this country. And of course, you also point out, Agustina, that if nothing else, there's just the legal limbo that it would be in if it's not ratified by Congress.
That's correct. Yes, if there were a program with a similar concept as the gold card, where people could, because our immigration system needs to be streamlined. It is really, really hard for Americans to hire workers from abroad. And there are many other than this new gold card. There are many visas that can help American employers hire foreign talent and foreign workers, but it's extremely hard to do. It is very hard, it's very onerous. And there are even for people who don't have certain qualifications in terms of educational degrees, there is no way for them to come here legally. For instance, many of the people that we see crossing the border, they don't fit in any sort of visa category. So if they wanted to come here to work for Americans, they really can't, because there is no pathway for them to do so. So a program that would streamline the process and actually create a path for those people to come here, for Americans to hire them, that would be a great step in reducing illegal immigration, because most people that come here, they don't cross the border because they think it's fun or because they want to, but because there's really no other way to come to America. So it would go a long way in streamlining that process, but that is not at all the way that the administration is thinking about this. As a matter of fact, it looks like the administration is seeing this new gold card as sort of a variant of the investor visa, which is already a visa that exists, but it's making it more onerous and more expensive. And it also has not modified the caps of that visa. So what it is in the end is it can potentially be a way to actually reduce legal immigration instead of increasing legal immigration.
That's one of the things I did want to talk to you about. I know that a while back you wrote a piece about mass protests and riots are hurting legal immigrants. And it does seem to me that the other day we had a piece that we read from Victor Davis Hanson, in which we said that because of all the things happening with illegal immigration, and you can think of the Afghanistan migrant that shot two individuals in Washington, D.C., National Guard, or you think of the Somali welfare fraud or a variety of other issues, there seems to be almost a backlash right now against legal immigration because of some of the things happening with illegal immigration. And you've written about in the past this whole idea that, at least with the Orange County Register, that some of these mass protests and riots are not helpful and really making it more difficult for Americans to accept this idea of legal immigration.
Yes, so that article that I wrote was in the context of, if you recall, back in July, there were a lot of protests outside, especially in Southern California, outside of federal buildings where legal immigrants go and, process, you have interviews for green cards or citizenship ceremonies and things like that. What happened back then was that because of those protests, the federal buildings had to close, which meant that a lot of interviews for legal immigrants were being rescheduled or canceled. Naturalization ceremonies were being delayed. So it really was hurting legal immigrants, like these protests, which, by the way, these protests were mostly Native-born Americans who were carrying out these protests. I am opposed to mass protests in general, regardless of the issue at hand, because I think they can be a violation of individual rights, including the right to move. But that was essentially the gist of the article. Now, I think that there's a lot going on with illegal immigration. I understand that this immigration system needs to be overhauled. I think we should welcome more people that want to come here to build a life in freedom. It is extremely hard to do, almost impossible for the vast majority of people to do that legally with the immigration system that we have right now.
And I've said that before, because
however,
we make illegal immigration sometimes too easy and legal immigration too difficult. So guess what happens? And that's why we have what we have right now. And there needs to be a real overhaul of the legal immigration system, don't you think?
I think so. I think it should be much more straightforward to have peaceful people who want to come here to work to be able to do so. However, I do think that what's going on with illegal immigration and the issues surrounding that has nothing to do with legal immigration. And I do think that those issues are being used to try to reduce legal immigration as well. I think it's an excuse. I don't think there is absolutely any connection between those two issues.
Yeah, and again, with Somalia, I think you're dealing with both people that were here illegally and illegally. And with Afghanistan, that, of course, is the system that was implemented after the fall of Afghanistan and the removal of troops and all sorts of things at that point. But again, I think it is a difficult issue. I know we'll call on you again, and we posted your piece here so people can learn a little bit more about Donald Trump's immigration gold card. That one came out months ago. So again, recognize that some of the numbers are different, but some of the concerns are the same. So, Agustina, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you so much for having me.
We are going to take a break, and then tomorrow, as I pointed out, we will get into some of those issues related to suffering and the Christian life. I think you will appreciate that. But let me hold up, as I have throughout the program here, some of the booklets. This one on anti-Semitism, related very much to the conversation we had with Paul Barreca. This one on terrorism, because I think you could honestly say that that was a terrorist attack there in Australia. I pulled up one here on civil disobedience. That relates very much to the one that we talked about with Sophia Hamilton, although, of course, she was talking more about the military. And then the one right now on immigration, which we talked with Agustina. And if you find yourself saying, well, I'd like to read some of those, well, we do make those available to you. But the best way to receive those, as I've mentioned before, is to actually become a Truth Team member. I also, of course, earlier on held up this book, this Outlook, which is the January issue on AI, which was a topic I also addressed. And this is the benefit. If you give on a monthly basis, you'll receive the Outlook magazine. If you join with us at least $1 a day, $30 a month, $360 a year, you'll receive the ongoing resources that we are making available through these booklets as well. And those show up in your mail. And of course, we have all sorts of other resources we like to send to you in your inbox. So I hope that as we come to year end, you'll consider what you might do to support this ministry. But you don't have to wait till December 31st. You could go right now to the website, pointofview.net. Click on that banner that says Give Now. We have a $155,000 matching challenge, and we would certainly love to hear from you. As always, I want to thank Megan for her help engineering the program. Steve, thank you for producing the program, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow right here on Point of View.
God is moving in this nation, and how we meet this moment will influence the future that our children and grandchildren inherit. Let me explain. Bible reading among self-identified Christians is higher than it's been in a decade, and it's millennials and Gen Z leading this Bible reading surge. But even though Bible reading is at a high, trust in the accuracy of the Bible is at a low. And that's why we must meet this moment to help the young adults who are seeking truth to become anchored to it. You can meet the moment by partnering with Point of View. Your partnership helps equip Americans with the biblical perspectives our nation so desperately needs. Give today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. And when you give by December 31st, your gift is doubled. That's pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.